Okay, this talk is about the future of Neovim, and I can't believe I'm having technical difficulties again, just like I did last time, but that's on me. I'm Justin Keys, and I'm a maintainer of Neovim. Next slide. Years ago, someone asked in an interview, Bram, how can the community keep Vim alive or healthy for the future? And Bram's reply was, keep me alive. So, and then around that time also, on the Vim mailing list, Bram said unequivocally that no new features would be added. So this was the climate in which Neovim emerged. And the goal of Neovim was to keep Vim alive. And it's been about 5 years, and Neovim has achieved that goal. You can see here that Vim was revived, and it adopted many features that were introduced in Neovim. Neovim, part of its goal was to prove concepts that previously had been considered improper or forbidden in a text editor. So here's an updated look at some stats for the project. It continues to grow in popularity. And now we're at an inflection point. So this is a cool and exciting time to, go to the next slide, please. And so this is a very interesting time in the project history, because we're at an inflection point. The project is more popular than it ever has been, but also Vim upstream has more activity and more development than it ever has. And Vim is taking technical directions that force us to sort of make a choice about where we want to go. Previously, we were pretty conservative about, we were relatively conservative about how closely we tracked Vim's features. The future of Neovim, the roadmap, the things that we're thinking about for where we want to focus our time, they comprise of, they have a strategic component and they have a technical direction. So let's talk about strategy first. And then again, strategy is essentially the most important outcome of our strategy is channeling this really unprecedented enthusiasm and energy in a productive and optimal way, because the risk there is that if we don't sort of channel it, then we just end up with a grab bag of features and an uneven surface area and something that doesn't really meet the usability goal of Neovim. The three main components of our strategy are the same as they've always been. The tagline there on GitHub has never changed, and the reason it hasn't changed is even though we evaluate it, we're always open to changing it, but evaluating it now reveals that this is still a strong motivation going forward. That is iterating on leverage, extensibility, and usability. And so now I'm going to talk about, I'm going to expand those a bit. So leverage is implied, well, it's useful, real quick, to define leverage. This is a powerful mental model, and it drives our decisions in the project. A small change can have high leverage if the change is really low cost and it has a marginal benefit for people, then that can be high leverage. Whereas something that is high cost, it might have a high impact, but if it's too high cost, then it still could be low leverage. So obviously, next slide, please. Obviously, the first component of our leverage is just the fact that we forked Vim. We're leveraging Vim's code. But then beyond that, we're leveraging. We sort of have repeated that pattern. Like we take on dependencies where we find projects that are strong and mature. So, for example, Lua is a very mature language design and language implementation, and this has parallels with epistemology and evolution in the sense that, like, it's a form of information sharing. It's not just sharing work, but it's actually sharing information, and it's sharing expertise. So, for example, when Bram implements Vim 9 script, just like with Vim script 1, he's the only person who really understands it, except for Nikolai Pavlov, who's been inactive for a few years. But there's not anyone that I've seen on the Vim development mailing list who understands the internals even half as well as Bram. But whereas when you take on a dependency like Lua or libuv, there's half a dozen or several dozen people that have expertise in that system. Yeah. So and the metaphor that I brought up before is it's like an iceberg with an ugly surface. But the metaphor that I favor these days is on the next slide, which is I think of it as asteroid mining. We have like a big miner planet that's packed with raw materials, and it takes a bit of work to extract the raw materials. So some challenges that Wikipedia lists with asteroid mining or extraction of value from an asteroid are these four things here: in-space manufacturing, on-site manufacturing, bringing raw material back home, processing on-site and returning a derivative form, or transporting the whole thing back home. And those are a lot like actually what we do with Neovim, which is kind of a good mnemonic. But I also think of it as zombie like reanimation sometimes, actually, especially since it's Halloween. I feel like we're kind of like doing work on Sir Gregor in Game of Thrones. So beyond the technical leverage that we achieve by reusing code and reusing the knowledge of third-party projects, our biggest challenge, I think, for the project now is to meaningfully channel all the positive energy that we're getting in the form of contributions and users. We have more thoughtful and skilled and active contributors than I've ever seen. Even in the beginning of the project, when there was when people were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And we've already channeled this in some, well, part of the reason I think that we got this energy was from the LSP subsystem and our investment in the Lewis Standard Library. So we're going, so it makes sense to continue that work, but then also what's come out of this enthusiasm and contributions are tree sitter and the diagnostic subsystem, and also these parallel configuration projects, LSP config and Vim tree sitter. But the challenge here, a big part of the challenge here is maintaining conceptual integrity. This is very important if we want to avoid just becoming sort of another asteroid that needs to be mined for raw materials, or like a landfill. If we want to have like actually a spaceship, then we need conceptual integrity. And so the bare minimum for achieving that, it might not be the whole solution, but at least the bare minimum up to now, we haven't invested enough in just sort of these soft practices like writing down guidelines and patterns, and so that we can capture the design discussions and the conventions that we all sort of know implicitly, but we haven't always captured them. And so we're spending sort of an increasing amount of time re-explaining these things, or having to unwind code that was written because someone didn't know the guidelines. So that all, like when the project is small, that doesn't matter so much. But it's just like with a distributed system. When you have a very large sort of, maybe like a cloud system, for example, things that happen 1 in a million times suddenly happen all the time if you're at a very large scale. And we're reaching a scale now with contributions where things that previously we considered yak shaving are now actually they're like a business requirement. Automated formatting is a good example of that. So we have two methods of aiding this effort, and they take the fan out form and a fan in form. So fan out would be just communicating better, and that's again documenting patterns and practices, and writing down run books for things like doing release engineering, and also capturing things in CI systems and automated pull requests. But another thing also, which is again kind of a soft thing, is Twitch and live streaming and pair programming. This is something that our core contributors actually use quite a bit, and it's really a high bandwidth way of communicating about designs, and you know, it's not the mode of operation that you always want to do, but when you have that as something that's part of even like 10% of your operation, then that has multiplicative benefits. Another fan out strategy is identifying like things that we want in core and things that we don't want in core. And so I think a good the thing that I've come up with right now is just like deciding something as a treadmill. So the treadmill is like a high churn topic. Things that are in the runtime, things that are platform specific, where the platform, by platform I mean like a language, or a compiler. Those things shouldn't live in core because they're high churn. And when you have high churn stuff going to that single focal point, which is the core repo, that ends up, that can be a big distraction for the core repo. And it also raises kind of questions about release cadence. And then related to that, this is, a thing that is a treadmill is implementing an entirely new programming language. So here's a small sampling of the crashes that are being fixed in upstream Vim. And this is like, that's just a hint about like, that I'll talk about later. So fan in instead of fan out is being able to take contributions more easily, so that contributors are happy and so that maintainers are spending their time on things that are higher leverage for everyone. Formatting is not something anybody should be spending their time on, so automating that is hugely beneficial. The more we can automate, we've been doing a better job of automating parts of Vim patching, and actually formatting is helping with Vim patch automation. And then we have automated PRs now for certain things such as version updates and documentation typos. Related to this, so like you want to automate stuff that's undifferentiated effort, and you also you don't want to spend your time in general on undifferentiated effort. Inventing a new programming language is undifferentiated effort, unless it's going to be something that's really just magically better than the existing programming languages or the existing solutions out there. The second tier of our strategy is usability, and let's skip that. Out of time. Yeah. Focusing on minimalism, like I just want to point out that usability is strongly correlated with minimalism. This is something that I think a lot of the software industry doesn't really realize. And so even like things like small improvements that we can make to the defaults and to the editor interface and editor behaviors, even if those end up being a lot of work, because of the broad surface of people, that downstream users, it ends up being something that has high leverage if we invest in that, even though they seem like small things, improvements to the defaults. Again, minimalism means less code. So embedding is less code, less recreations of Vim editors, collaboration with and reusing code from third parties like libuv and libvterm. That's less code. This is minimalism. Next slide. Yeah, and writing a new language is the opposite of minimalism. And the cool thing about Lua is that we can focus on writing features, which means libraries. This is similar to Clojure's approach. Like, the language is complete. You don't need more language features. You don't need a fancy way to write numbers. You can just focus on libraries and actual features. And so the third tier of our strategy is extensibility. And here's just an example of the kind of things you can do with our extensibility. This is just in the help. If you go to help TCP server, you can see that just by pasting this code, you suddenly have a TCP server because we used libuv, high leverage. Here's another example, file detection. We get this because we built on top of libuv. So the second half of our roadmap and of Neovim's future is the technical direction, and the key takeaway here is that because of this inflection point in Vim, where Vim has taken a wildly different direction than we want, it just makes the choice easier for us that now we can diverge more aggressively than we have. And that means, and we're also going to be more aggressive about deprecating things and experimenting with APIs. And yes, that means breaking changes at some in some subsystems. It doesn't. We will never break the RPC API, but we are going to start selectively breaking some subsystems so that we can iterate faster. And this is a key change in our direction. So our investment in Lua has been a huge success. This link at the top here is a great guide to Lua in Neovim. I highly recommend that you visit it if you haven't already. It's really well written, and they make good choices. And that's the kind of like just theme that I want the whole project to be about: is making good choices, having good taste, and having like conceptual integrity and a central theme or two, instead of just like a grab bag of scattered features. So something cool that recently happened in the last few months, because of the usages that we were seeing of the diagnostic submodule in the LSP subsystem, we recognized that and we realized that it needs to be pulled out. And we did that within 2 weeks, and it required some breaking changes. But because we didn't have that hesitation and paralysis, we got that done in 2 weeks. And that was also because of one of our awesome and thoughtful new contributors helping with that. So a key component of the technical direction that I want to emphasize is that we are just going to be doubling and tripling down on Lua. And that means writing more core functions in Lua. It means like probably we'll probably start rewriting some of the C code in Lua, just because number one, this is not just a rewrite. You actually a lot of times will end up fixing random null reference bugs that no one noticed, and because there was like missing validation in the eval layer. And the reason that there's missing validation in a lot of these in a lot of these eval implementations is because it's so hard to reuse code in C. And whereas if we do it in Lua, of course, we're going to have some sort of validation layer that's just easily reusable everywhere. The other thing that we're going to try to start, we want to paint a picture so Neovim is a single platform, but it has these sort of three engines for historical reasons, but they all bridge across each other. And so most of the stuff we implement is probably going to be in Lua, but you can use Lua from Vim script, so it doesn't matter really. But this is just sort of something that we need to start sort of making cohesive in our documentation and adding ergonomics where we can, so that this idea continues to like converge to where like it is just one platform. It doesn't matter if something is in Vim script or whatever. You can use Vim script from the API. You can use Lua from the API, and all the other different permutations thereof. We're also exploring actually having Lua Rocks, the Lua package manager, as a package manager that would be sort of a first class part of the Neovim ecosystem. So yeah, I mentioned that we're going to be deprecating things more aggressively, and that's part of our strategy here, so that we can move fast. But it's only going to be in, certain subsystems, and we're going to have mechanisms that give clear messaging, so that breakage is not just a horrible mess of missing references or missing names or something like that. We'll have sort of clear migration messaging, but also we want to make we should make a distinction between degraded UX and broken UX. So, if something in the UI breaks, then as long as it's not stopping you from working, then that's just something that we need to swallow, so that we can move fast. And this is sort of like a picture of that idea. Like some subsystems will be sacred and others won't be. The Lua layer is going to be a bit crazy for a while, but then some of them will settle down and cool off. Yeah, we can skip this slide. This is just, but here's an example of the idea, like what's going on here. This is just a picture, a simulated annealing. Like there's a lot of activity, and then it swirls around, and at each sort of layer of heat, there's some cooling and some coalescing of concepts, and then eventually we arrive at something that's nearly optimal. And this will help us avoid cases where we just have like lots of old sort of half implemented APIs, and this is not good for users to have lots of sort of hairy APIs that live forever. Yeah, so Vim has taken a hard left and has implemented its own language again. And this language is 1,200 commits, 2 years of work, at least 20,000 lines of C code. And so this will be another 30 years of bugs. The cool thing about the Vim text editor is the DSL. The DSL is X commands and normal commands. Vim script was an accident. The eval layer only exists because it was expedient. It never really needed to be integrated with X commands and normal commands at all. That you can see, like, just by looking at the Lua layer, like you can have a normal language, and then then the DSL is in its own world. You do not need to have them intermixed. So we want to leverage Vim, but the plan always for Neovim was that we didn't want to really horizontally expand the C core. C is good for what it is, and we're very well versed in it and comfortable with it. But it's just amazing to see how much faster we move with a higher level language, and we've seen that with just a massive amount of activity in the Lua modules in the last 2 years. Using C for performance doesn't make sense anyways, because some of the slowest parts of the editor are implemented in C, such as vimgrep. Like, it's just there's no technical reason for expanding the C core, and so this is a strong reason to avoid taking on Vim 9 script. Similar to that, POSIX-VI compatibility it never made any sense for Vim to begin with, really. It might have been a foot in the door like idea like way in the early beginning, but thereafter, like envi exists and the code is frozen. So POSIX-VI compatibility doesn't really gain anything for users or for Vim itself. And Vim is not shipped on BSDs. And the tiny version of Vim that's on Linux, on a lot of Linuxes, It doesn't help users anyways, because they still have to do the same steps to install the full version of Vim that they would to install Emacs or some other editor. So similar to that, we need to recognize this parallel in Neovim and not make the same mistake where we're trying to adhere to Vim compatibility just out of some fear or anxiety. So I don't know how much time I have left, but yeah, this is just more emphasis on where we're going in the project. We're going to be investing more in our UI layer. This has been a huge success. There are several high quality GUIs using our UI layer. Fire in Vim is a massively successful UI client that puts Vim in your browser. I use it every day. It's flawless. And if you're not using it, then you should check it out. We can skip this slide. Yeah. So here's a cool thing that FVim has done recently with the UI layer. That this is a variable font showing in the same buffer. Same buffer, different font sizes. And then just some words about Lua on a theoretical level. It's if you haven't read this design of Lua, it's worth your time. And it's actually this is a common with the Lua manual too. It's often well written. It's like delightfully clearly written and simple. And the key components of Lua are just these three concepts. So this is, again, conceptual integrity: tables, functions, and coroutines. And something that's just really surprising is the consistency. Everything is a function, including the module itself. The script itself is actually a function. It's a closure. It closes over the whole script, and it closes it in a function, and that happens at every layer. And then the accessing scope is totally lexical. This is you don't realize how amazing, beautiful this is until you go back to like using JavaScript or TypeScript. The scoping is just haphazard in those cases. So we can skip this slide and this one. And this is what I just said. Yeah, everything's a function. And the regular sort of structure in the engine means that everything can be inspected